Hey guys, welcome to the fifth lesson on behavioral health. Today, we'll be talking about the aware mind. First, we'll talk about various states of consciousness, different stages of sleeping, and sleep-wake disorders, and finally, we'll talk about hallucinogens, stimulants, depressants, and opiates. First, let's talk about consciousness. So here are three terms that you'll need to understand. Consciousness is a special state of awareness where we know what's going on internally and in our environment. Self-awareness is the special, unique understanding of each individual to themselves. The brain structures related to consciousness are cerebral cortex, the thalamus, and the reticular formation, which are located in various parts of the brains. Here is a diagram of these three parts. And finally, nocturnal and diurnal animals vary the state of their consciousness in order to allow for most effective times for repair, conservation of energy, in the safest manner. Nocturnal animals are active during the night and sleep during the daytime, while diurnal animals, including humans, are active during the daytime and sleep during the nighttime. A rouge test is used commonly in order to determine whether a baby has self-awareness. It's a test that indicates whether or not someone can recognize themselves in a mirror, because this is a significant developmental milestone. It's used to study self-awareness across multiple species, not just humans. It was developed by Lewis and Brooks Gunn in 1979, in which a dot of odorless dye is placed on a child's forehead. The dye is usually red, which is why it's called a rouge test. And the child will observe themselves in a mirror. The results, which were quite replicable across many different replications, for babies that were less than 18-month old had no recognition of themselves, so there was no indication of self-awareness. Whereas for babies who were older than 18 months, they demonstrated self-awareness because they would rub the spot of rouge on themselves instead of laughing or interacting with the figure in the mirror. They would also sometimes turn their own body for a better view. So we can understand that the baby in the top of the screen is a baby that is likely younger than 18 months old, whereas the baby on the bottom side of the screen is likely older than 18 months. Now here is what's called a default mode network, which maintains a high level of unconscious activity, which prepares the brain for unconscious thought. It's very closely related to daydreaming, which we'll touch upon later. The parts include the medial prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for thinking about yourself. So these are things like introspection, emotional evaluation, and planning the future. The medial parietal cortex is the central hub of the default mode network, and it integrates self-referential information, memory retrieval, and mental scenes. For example, essentially, it's integrating common sense information about beaches, let's say, with a specific memory of a vacation, and you can synthesize that information to picture that specific beach in your mind. The lateral parietal cortex connects external sensory inputs to internal processes. For example, connecting the physical photograph of a childhood home with the memories and emotions associated with growing up there. Episodic memory helps recall specific events. For example, you can imagine vividly your 10th birthday party and its details, which is all supported by the lateral parietal cortex. It helps retrieve the memory and the conceptual processing, which are abstract concepts that aren't directly tied to the environment immediately. So you can witness something and use the lateral parietal cortex to imagine what would happen if you were in those people's shoes, right? So you're imagining scenarios if you were the subject. And finally, the lateral temporal cortex is responsible for semantic memory, which is essentially the meaning of words and concepts. It links personal experiences with broader knowledge in tangent with the lateral parietal cortex. Remember the example with the beach. So here is a recap of the things that we've covered. So a state of awareness is level of conscious awareness of the internal states or surroundings. It can be high or low, realistic or distorted. For example, these states of awareness include being asleep or being awake, perceiving realistically versus hallucinating, whether or not you're hypnotized, which actually had some solid ground in the psychological field in the 20th century, and whether or not you're meditating. Now, the content of awareness is basically whatever you're thinking about, whatever the subject of your awareness is at. The textbook definition is the ongoing catalog of internal and external stimuli that are the focus of your current attention. For example, if the neighbor is blasting music, you may pay attention to it. Or if you're hungry, you may think that it's time to eat. Finally, there is an example of considering the implications of a news report and how that might have to do with you potentially going back to the default mode network. Self-awareness is the special understanding of oneself as a distinct uh, understanding from other stimuli. So, for example, you are looking at yourself in the mirror. That would be self-awareness. Another more interesting type of self-awareness is self-awareness while you're sleeping. You can know that you're sleeping, and you can also, believe it or not, know whether or not you are dreaming. If you are able to control the dream, that is also called lucid dreaming, which we do not study in behavioral health, but that's some food for thought. So, speaking of sleeping, here is our next topic of interest. So, we measure perception in three ways. So, there's sleep, there's wakefulness, and a biological clock. So sleep is a normal state of consciousness characterized by reduced awareness of external stimuli. That is the textbook definition which we'll base our understanding of sleep on. Wakefulness is a normal state of consciousness which is characterized by alertness and awareness of external stimuli. A biological clock is an internal mechanism that provides an approximate schedule for a wide variety of physical processes. It's controlled by the hypothalamus, which schedules sleep and waking, body temperature, as well as hunger. External stimuli, like eating patterns, can also influence this biological clock. This is very closely related and can almost be interchangeable with circadian rhythm. It's a daily biological rhythm which responds to a combination of internal and external factors, such as the ones covered in the last slide. It's controlled by the hypothalamus, as we know, and gives us a schedule for physical processes. If it's messed up, it can have certain effects like jet lag, which really messes up your sleep schedule. And too much change can lead to decreased reaction time and memory loss. This is caused by grogginess and a lack of sleep, which is very important for memory consolidation. Everyone has different circadian rhythms. It's possible to be a morning person as well as a night owl, and many in between. Seasonal affective disorder, also known by its acronym SAD, or major depressive disorder with seasonal patterns, is a mood disorder in which depression occurs regularly at the same time annually, usually during the winter months. It occurs when less light is available for setting the body's internal clock most of the time. Approximately 4 to 6% of the population experiences this. Now, waking. This is measured usually with an electroencephalogram, or, in other words, an EEG, which is the more common name used to identify the machine. And it records measures of overall brain activity in waveforms and hence awareness. In waking hours, you'll have beta waves, alpha waves, and gamma waves. Beta waves are from 15 to 30 cycles per second, which is alert waking. Alpha waves are 2 to 12 cycles per second, indicating relaxed waking, and gamma waves, which are more than 30 cycles per second, is a state of waking where you're very attentive to sensory inputs. Daydreaming, on the other hand, is a spontaneous, subjective experience in a situation with no stimuli or responsiveness. It's correlated, as we know, with the default mode network, although scientists have not been able to determine and pinpoint the exact purpose or benefit of daydreaming on humans. Sleeping is categorized into two main types, non-REM and REM sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement because this is a state of sleep where your eyes are actually making various movements. NREM sleep is divided into four stages based on numbers 1 to 4, and each stage has unique categories, including brainwave patterns. That's how we identify which stage the person is in. Sleep cycles last around 90 minutes, and these sleep cycles alternate between NREM and REM sleep. An 8-hour sleep typically includes about 5 full sleep cycles. That's why it's very important to get sufficient sleep, or else you will not have enough cycles, especially for REM sleep, which, as you know, is very important. So there are two types. REM, which we've briefly discussed, is characterized by waveforms that resemble waking, and it's accompanied by those rapid motions of the eyes. On the other hand, your muscles below the neck can sometimes actually be paralyzed during REM sleep. This is actually very common and should happen most of the time. And interestingly, it actually activates the sympathetic nervous system, which is associated with fight or flight, whereas NREM sleep is characterized by theta and delta waves and deep physical relaxation. A theta wave is characteristic of lighter stages of non-rapid eye movement sleep, and delta waves are usually indicative of deep non-rapid eye movement sleep. NREM sleep. So now we'll cover all the unique stages of NREM. Stage 1 is the transition between wakefulness and sleep. The brain waves are similar to wakefulness, and some activity occurs. You may experience hypnagogic hallucinations while you're in this stage due to the transition sensations. For example, you could have a sensation of falling. A hypnagogic jerk yeah, can be essentially it can be awakened by your own unintentional rapid twitching of the leg or other muscles. This usually is what accompanies that sensation of falling. It lasts 6 to 8 minutes, and during this time, it's very easy for you to wake up. It's common in the first sleep cycle, but often it disappears afterwards. In stage 2, the brain waves, your pulse, and your breathing slow down. Sleep spindles, which are bursts of neural activity which can be seen on an EEG graph, occur, which aids memory. It accounts for 50% of total sleep time in adults, and it's harder to wake up in this stage compared to stage 1. In stage 3, this is the beginning of slow wave sleep. You have very, very slow brain waves at this point, and your pulse and breathing are slowing down further. It's a very deep sleep, and it's hard to wake up during this time. It makes up about 8% of sleep in healthy adults. In stage 4, which is the deepest stage of slow wave sleep, the brain waves are the slowest, so it's the hardest to wake up during this time. If you do happen to wake up during stage 4 or the deeper stages of NREM sleep in general, this will cause grogginess. It comprises about 15% of total sleep in adults. Finally, let's discuss REM sleep, which I find to be a fascinating topic. It's distinct from NREM stages 1 to 4. It's the stage in which you dream. The brain activity is high, which is similar to wakefulness, but it's also called paradoxical sleep because remember how from the neck below your body is paralyzed? Well, this is because your body needs to prevent you from acting out your dreams during this stage of sleep. Because if you do, you can actually cause harm to your own body. Periods of REM lengthen as the night progresses, and there's a mixture of NREM and REM sleep throughout the night. There are two interesting types of phenomenon that happen during REM sleep for some people. Uh, so sleepwalking, rather, for our REM and non-REM sleep, sleepwalking occurs during the stages 3 and 4 of NREM sleep, while sleep talking happens during lighter stages of NREM sleep. Birds and mammals exhibit REM sleep, which indicates that it's a recent evolution because of the timeline of the presence of these types of species. REM sleep paralysis prevents actions that may harm the sleeper, as we've talked about. If you happen to get conscious during this time, it can be very scary and you can experience sleep paralysis monsters. Now, here is a chart that illustrates what's shown on an EEG for each stage of sleep. So REM sleep, which is similar to active brain waves, right? So they feature beta waves. Stage 1 NREM features theta waves. Stage 2, you can see those sleep spindles, right, which are um, levels of high neural activity in the brain and K complexes. In stage 3, you see delta waves, and in stage 4, yet more delta waves. Now here is a summary of what we've talked about. In wakefulness, you have alpha and beta brainwaves. It's alternating between periods of alertness and relaxation, logical thought, voluntary movement, and and responsiveness to stimuli. In non-rapid eye movement sleep stage 1, there are some theta brainwaves. You still have logical thought, but there is reduced heart rate and muscle tension, and there is some responsiveness to stimuli. That's why it's very easy to wake up during this stage. In stage 2, there are larger amounts of theta, less responsiveness to stimuli, and further reductions in the heart rate and muscle tension. In stage 3, you change to delta brainwaves. And in stage 4, you have very profound reductions in your heart rate and muscle tension, so you're very relaxed, and there's very low responsiveness to stimuli. It's very hard to wake someone up from this stage, and if you do, they can become groggy. For REM sleep, it's similar to beta brainwaves, but there is also some theta. So as the name suggests, you have very rapid eye movements during this stage. There's also muscle paralysis to protect you from acting out your dreams and harming yourself. There is irregular autonomic activity as well as vivid dreams during this stage. So actually, I think this is pretty good. These are pretty good graphs to demonstrate the sleep cycle, including NREM and REM sleep. So, especially if you focus on the one on the right, as sleep goes on, your REM gets longer and longer, whereas the stage 1 of NREM sleep completely disappears one cycle in. Third, let's talk about sleep-wake disorders. Sleeping disorders include nightmares, sleep terrors, and insomnia. Nightmares occur during REM sleep. Sleep terrors are not during REM sleep actually. That's why they're not Nightmares are classified as dreams, but sleep terrors aren't dreams. They're slightly different. It's a condition where a person quickly awakens from sleep in a terrified state, which occurs during NREM sleep. Insomnia is the most common sleep issue after nightmares. It's difficulty to initiate or maintain sleep. Onset insomnia is the phenomenon where a person lies in bed for what seems to be a long period of time, but they cannot go to sleep. Maintenance insomnia, on the other hand, is when a sleeping person is very easily interrupted or early waking occurs. Next, we have narcolepsy, cataplexy, and sleep apnea. Narcolepsy consists of sleep attacks in which suddenly you start to go into REM sleep when you're supposed to be awake. Cataplexy occurs when the muscle paralysis, normally associated with REM sleep, occurs during wakefulness without a loss of consciousness. This is what we've been discussing with sleep paralysis, right? And the sleep paralysis monsters. Sleep apnea is a condition where your breathing can actually stop for a minute or two, and in order to catch their air, the sleeper is forced to wake up by their body and they abruptly gasp for air. Now, this can cause a very high deduction in the quality of sleep, so it's detrimental to the quality of life of the individual. Next, we have sudden infant death syndrome and comas. SIDS occurs when a healthy infant simply dies while asleep. These are usually newborns. It's the most common cause of death in the first 6 months of a child's life in industrialized nations, even as the cause of these cases remain elusive. In a state of coma, a person does not have sleep-wake cycles. They cannot be awakened, does not respond to pain or light, and they are incapable of voluntary behavior. Comas occur whenever both cerebral hemispheres or the reticular formation in the brain are damaged. Brain death is defined as the complete and irreversible lack of measurable brain activity as evidenced by two flatline EEG recordings taken 24 hours apart or the lacking of blood circulation to the brain. In brain death, the patient shows no responses to external stimuli, including pain, and no reflexes related to the cranial nerves. Finally, we'll talk about hallucinogens, stimulants, depressants, and opiates. So begins our discussion with hallucinogens, which are psychoactive substances capable of producing hallucinations, or false perceptions, interfering with the normal consciousness of sensory input, referring back to the first topic which we've discussed, which is awareness. So these include mushrooms, mescaline, phencyclidine, marijuana, and cannabis, which have a slightly milder effect, as well as LSD, which has a very strong effect. Interestingly, you don't get addicted chemically to LSD. You can get addicted, however, to the experience of the high when you have the LSD. It's quite interesting how that differentiates from other types of drugs. Stimulants impact consciousness by increasing alertness and mobility while decreasing reaction time. These include things like caffeine, nicotine, cocaine, and amphetamine, methylphenidate, and MDMA, which and the party name for that is ecstasy. Depressants share the ability to slow down the activity of the nervous system, leading to reductions in alertness and anxiety. You actually overcompensate for this with things like alcohol, which is why you may feel a rush after consuming too much alcohol, but really your nervous system is slowing down dramatically. This also includes benzodiazepines and barbiturates. Finally, opiates and narcotics. These are what we usually tend to associate with the rush of consuming drugs in mainstream media, right? They're also known as opiates, and they're a group of drugs that dull the senses and relieve pain. They include opium, heroin, and morphine. They release dopamine, which, remember, can lead to feelings of well being and pain reduction. It's that sense of euphoria. It can also be used for that reason in medical situations. High doses create a rapid onset of that euphoria. It's that rush, and it has a strong depression effect on breathing, which can occasionally lead to death. In low doses, it's actually good for medical contexts where you get the euphoria, but also pain reduction, and it can also help with sleep patterns. So concludes our discussion of the awareness of the mind. So that's about it. If you have any questions, please leave them down below in the comments. And thanks again for watching this video lesson on the awareness of the mind and sleep, drugs in behavioral health. And hope to see you guys in the next video. See you then.